guys, welcome back to the channel. And today is True Crime Video Day. I am Jen from Jen's Creations, and today's video is going to be about the alphabet murders. Now, I had never really followed this one, or really never heard a whole lot about this this case, and I don't even remember how it came up. I think I was listening to a podcast or something. I don't remember, but anyway, this so we're just going to get started. This is the alphabet murders were also called the double initial murders, if that makes any sense, and they are unsolved child murders that occurred between 1971 and 1973 in Rochester, New York. All three of the victims were aged 10 or 11 and whose surname began with the same letter as that of her first name. Now, each victim had been sexually assaulted and murdered by either manual or ligature strangulation before her body was discarded in or near a town near Rochester with a name that began with the same letter as the victim's name, if that makes any sense to me. That was confusing. Now, the first murder we're going to talk about is Carmen Cologne, or Cologne. At 4:20 p.m. on November the 16th, 1971, a 10-year-old Puerto Rican child disappeared while returning home from an errand in Rochester, New York. She entered the pharmacy her grandmother had instructed her to visit, but left the store after learning that the prescription she had been instructed to collect had not been processed, informing the store owner, Jack Corbin, that she had to go. She was then observed entering a car parked close to the pharmacy. Carmen was reported missing to the police department at 7:50 p.m. Approximately 50 minutes after Carmen exited the pharmacy, scores of motorists driving along the interstate observed the child naked from the waist down, running from a reversing vehicle believed to have been a dark-colored Ford Pinto hatchback. Now, that's a car I have not heard in for forever. She was frantically waving her arms and shouting in an attempt to flag down a passing vehicle. One of the witnesses observed Cologne being submissively led back to this vehicle by her abductor. Now, 2 days later, two teenage boys discovered her partially nude body in a gully not far from the interstate and close to the village of Churchville. The location was approximately 12 miles from where Carmen had been last seen. Her coat was discovered in a culvert some 300 feet from her body. Her trousers were only discovered on November the 30th, close to the service road where numerous motorists had observed her attempting to escape. The autopsy revealed that in addition to having been raped, the child had suffered a fracture to her skull and one of her vertebrae before she'd been manually strangled to death. And her body also had been extensively scratched by fingernails. Both the murder of Cologne and the fact no individual who had observed the child attempting to flee from her abductor had attempted to offer any assistance generated in this public outrage. Excuse me. Two New York papers initially offered a combined reward of $2,500 for information leading to the arrest and the conviction of her murderer, and all the information each publication received was relayed to the police. Although the police interrogated, numerous businesses and residents added donations to the reward fund, which gradually led to the amount of $6,000. The police did interrogate several suspects following Carmen's murder, and they were all cleared. And by December the 21st, the number of investigators assigned to the case had been decreased to 3. Now, mind you, in 1972, there were 5 large billboards, each measuring 30 by 12 feet, were erected along major Rochester expressways, and they each bore a picture of the child alongside the headline, "Do you know who killed Carmen Colon?" Free use of the billboards was given for 1 month. Each offered a $6,000 reward, leading to the arrest of Carmen's murderer or murderers, in addition to displaying the telephone hotline. Even though they put the billboard up, this didn't really generate any new leads at all whatsoever. Then, excuse me. Then the next victim was Wanda Wilkoski. She disappeared 17 months later at approximately 5 p.m. on April the 2nd, 1973. She was 11 years old. She disappeared from the east side of Rochester while returning home from an errand. Now, I don't know if you can see it or not, but this seems to me like there's a pattern where these, children are approximately the same age, and they're walking to and from on errands for whomever. Now, she had gone to a delicatessen, and she had been she purchased groceries she had been instructed to buy at 5:15 p.m. before she began walking alone down Conkey Avenue. She was reported missing by her mother at 8 p.m. The police then launched an extensive search to locate Wanda. 50 detectives searched several square miles around her home, the delicatessen, and areas around the Genesee River, where she was known to play. Now, they failed to locate the child, although several neighborhood residents observed her struggling to carry a bag of groceries, walking just north of Avenue B. There were 3 classmates that specifically observed her bracing the bag against a fence so that she can improve her grip upon the bag as a brown vehicle drove past her. They found her fully clothed body by a police officer at 10:15 a.m. the next day, discarded on a hillside along an access road in Webster, approximately 7 miles from Rochester. The position of her body indicated that she might have been thrown from a vehicle with her body rolling down the embankment. Her autopsy did reveal that she had been sexually assaulted, then strangled with a ligature, most likely a belt. There were several defensive wounds indicated that Wanda had fought her murderer. In addition, her body had been redressed. The autopsy revealed there were traces of semen and pubic hair. Furthermore, several strands of white cat fur were found upon her clothing. And they did, find out that her family did not own a pet with fur of this color. They had now In the same as with the case with Carmen's case, they established an anonymous telephone hotline. They also distributed numerous flyers throughout Rochester appealing for information, a reward of $10,000 leading to the arrest and the conviction of her murderer was established. Police inquiries produced an eyewitness who informed investigators that Wanda had walked home from the delicatessen on the evening of April 2nd. He observed the child standing alongside the passenger door of a large brown vehicle, conversing with the driver. The eyewitness was unable to get a clear view of the occupant of the vehicle, although the location of this sighting was just 0.2 of a mile from Wanda's home. Another individual who contacted investigators informed them that she had observed a man forcing a red-haired girl matching Wanda's description into a light-colored Dodge Dart on Conkey Avenue between 5:30 and 6 p.m. on the evening of her disappearance. They dismissed any suggestion of a link between Carmen's murder and Wanda's, although a sheriff's sergeant who had been assigned to investigate Carmen's murder. Now, remind you, Carmen's murder remained inactive even though it was still open, and was reassigned to the task force to investigate Wanda's murder. September 1973, a local television network had announced plans to broadcast a televised reconstruction of Wanda's abduction and subsequent recovery of her body. This 30-minute episode was broadcast on October the 21st, accompanied by public appeals for witnesses to contact authorities. Even though this was put on TV, there were no leads. 7 months later, on November the 26th, 1973, Michelle Menenza, who she was 11 years old, was reported missing by her mother after she failed to return to come home from school. The investigation would determine that Michelle was last seen by her classmates at approximately 3:20 p.m. walking alone en route to a shopping plaza located close to her school with the intention of retrieving a purse her mother had left inside a store within the plaza earlier that day. Approximately 10 minutes after that, a witness observed Michelle sitting in the passenger seat of a beige or tan vehicle traveling at high speed on Ackerman Street before turning onto Webster Avenue. According to the witness, the child had been crying. At 5:30 p.m. on November the 26th, a motorist observed a man standing by a large tan vehicle with a flat tire parked along Route 350 in the town of Walworth, holding a girl that he strongly believed was Michelle Menza by the wrist. When this motorist had stopped to offer assistance, the individual had grabbed the girl and pushed her behind his back, blocking his license plate from the motorist's view as he stared in his direction with a menacing expression on his face that the motorist decided to drive away. I would too, but then again, if there's a child involved, but then you got to realize too, you don't have cell phones back then, so it's kind of hard, to make a phone call. Michelle's body was found at 10:30 p.m. or 10:30 a.m. on the 28th of November, lying face down in a ditch alongside a rural road in Macedon, approximately 15 miles from Rochester. Her body was fully clothed. Her autopsy revealed that in addition to receiving blunt force trauma to her body, Menenza had been raped and strangled to death, possibly by a thin rope. Numerous strands of white cat fur were discovered on her clothing, and leaf samples matching the foliage where her body was discovered from it within one of her clenched hands, indicating that she had likely been strangled to death at or near her location where she was found. The investigators were able to retrieve a partial palm print from her neck and traces of semen from her body and underwear. These samples determined that she had been raped by one individual. No. Now, they did an analysis of the stomach contents in Michelle's stomach, and they revealed traces of hamburger and onions, which had been approximately consumed by her 1 hour before her murder, giving credence to earlier reports of a girl matching her description had been seen in the company of a Caucasian man with dark hair between the ages of 25 and 35, approximately 6 feet tall and weighing 165 pounds, both at a fast food restaurant in the town of Penfield at approximately 4:30 on the afternoon of her disappearance, and then alongside Route 350 approximately 1 hour later. You know, how do I want to put this? I guess if somebody was if somebody had called in and told them, like they did, but even though you can't really do anything because he's, obscuring the license plate, so he couldn't really see, you couldn't really see anything. Now, Carmen's funeral was conducted, and in November of 1971, her funeral was attended by 200 mourners. Wanda was laid to rest on April the 6th, 1973. Michelle's funeral was held on December 1973. Now, the investigation the murders generated an intense public outrage. Each received intense publicity. Following the murder of Michelle, investigators did release the composite drawing of the individual seen with the child that numerous witnesses had seen, and this composite was released to the media. They also installed a telephone hotline that was exclusively devoted to the manhunt, and they strongly suspect for the perpetrator, and anonymity was again offered to any caller offering information, and a reward was again offered for any information leading to the arrest. There were numerous calls, believe me, but there was no possible credible suspect. Now, the investigators did interrogate more than 800 potential suspects in relation to the Alphabet murders. The perpetrator or the perpetrators of the homicide were never caught, and of course this case remains unsolved. Each child hailed from a poor Catholic family, had few friends, and had recently experienced issues such as bullying or poor academic performance at her school. The investigators have not discounted the possibility that the murderer may have been employed or held knowledge of practices of social services agency, and he was the one, and that he initiated contact to gain the trust of each victim. Now, there are similarities in this case, which, like I told you before, the investigators did not think there were any links to this, but they do realize later on that there are. Now, all three victims were pre-adolescent females that disappeared from Rochester in the early afternoon on days that it was either lightly raining or heavily raining. Their bodies were later discovered within nearby towns. The bodies of each girl had been discovered, and they were either fully clothed or partially clothed, close to an expressway, which is a location typically accessible by a vehicle, and each victim had evidently been thrown from or carried from a car to the location her body had been discarded. Each child was short in height, and they had all three been raped before being strangled to death. In addition to that, all three were known to be viewed as somewhat outcasts among their peers. Furthermore, there was an analysis of the stomach contents on both Wanda and Michelle. They revealed that both girls had ingested food shortly before their death, which neither girl is known to have eaten prior to her disappearance. The bodies of both of the girls have been redressed after their death. Both contemporary and current investigators have stated the possibility that each victim had been selected due to the double initials of their name, which is extremely unlikely. As for an offender to pre-select his victims for such an incidental reason, that would likely involve stalking his victim over an extensive period of time, thus risking himself being noticed. They also believe that although Wanda and Michelle's murders may have been committed by the same individual who had lured the girls to their deaths, the MO of the murder of Carmen Colon strongly indicates her murder had been committed by an individual known and possibly related to her, as opposed to an individual unknown to her who had abducted her by force. Now, there are suspects in this case. The first suspect is Miguel Colon. He is Carmen's uncle. He was considered by the investigators to be a strong suspect in her murder. He is the brother of Carmen's father, Justiniano. Following the separation of Carmen's parents, he had formed a relationship with her mother, becoming known to Carmen as Uncle Miguel, which I'm assuming, I guess, okay, yeah, technically he is kind of her uncle. I mean, he's related to her father. Okay. Now, on occasion, Carmen would walk to the pharmacy to collect family prescriptions, and she had been accompanied by her grandfather Felix on the date of her disappearance. Carmen had pleaded with her grandparents to be allowed to walk to the pharmacy by herself. Now, weeks prior to Carmen's abduction and her murder, her uncle was known to have purchased a car closely matching the vehicle seen by eyewitnesses reversing on Interstate 490 in pursuit of the child. They did conduct a search of the vehicle shortly after Carmen's murder, discovering the interior and the exterior of the car had been extensively cleaned, and the trunk had been washed with a strong cleaning solution. Questioning of the dealership which recently sold the vehicle to Miguel revealed that the trunk had not been washed prior to the sale. Moreover, a doll belonging to the child was found in his car, although Carmen's relatives informed investigators that she had frequently traveled in Miguel's vehicle and that she may have left the toy in the car. And according to a friend, 2 days after the death of his niece, Miguel had informed them of his intention to leave the country as he had done something wrong in Rochester. He relocated to Rochester to Puerto Rico 4 days after the murder of his niece. Now, the investigators traveled to San Juan to question Miguel. Although local newspapers published articles detailing their intentions to question him, Miguel ended up fleeing. Miguel surrendered and agreed to be extradited back to Rochester to face questioning. He was unable to provide a credible alibi for his movements on the date of his niece's murder. No individual could be located to corroborate his claims regarding his whereabouts. Even though there was strong circumstantial evidence attesting to his guilt, there was no physical evidence located at the crime scene or in his vehicle to link him to the murder. Miguel Colon committed suicide in 1991 at the age of 44 following an incident of domestic violence where he shot and wounded his wife and his brother. So, yeah. Then, the next suspect is Dennis Termini. Now, he's considered a very, very strong suspect in the Alphabet murders. He is a 25-year-old Rochester firefighter. He was a prolific serial offender known as the Garage Rapist, who is known to have committed a minimum of 14 rapes on teenage girls between 1971 and 1973. He is also known to have owned a beige vehicle similar to the vehicle described by eyewitnesses. However, he is also known to have lived at an address on Box Street, an address close to the area where Michelle Menenza was last seen alive. Five weeks after the death of the final victim of the Alphabet murders on January 1st, 1974, Termini is known to have attempted to abduct a teenage girl at gunpoint. Now, even though he fled the scene when the teenager refused to cease screaming, shortly after that, he abducted another potential victim, and he was pursued by police, which culminating in him committing suicide by shooting himself in the head. Now, there was a forensic examination of his vehicle, which did reveal traces of white cat fur on the upholstery. In January of 2007, his body was exhumed to obtain a DNA sample for comparison from samples recovered from Wanda's body. The results of that test confirmed that he was not responsible for her murder. However, there was no physical evidence retrieved from Carmen or Michelle's bodies that exist for comparison with Termini's DNA. Now, the next suspect, you all may recognize the name. He is he's also a well-known serial killer. Now, Kenneth Bianchi, who at the time of the murders worked as an ice cream vendor in Rochester. He it was known to have worked at locations close to the first two murder scenes. He had relocated from Rochester to Los Angeles in 1976, which you guys may remember between 1977 and 1978, he and his cousin, Angelo Bonoa Jr., committed the Hillside Strangler murders of 10 girls and young women between the ages of 12 and 28. Now, he was never charged with the Alphabet murders, and he has denied any kind of culpability in these homicides. He has repeatedly attempted to have investigators clear him. However, while residing in New York, he is known to have driven a vehicle of the same color and model as the vehicle that was seen near one of the abduction sites. The next suspect is Joseph Nasso. In April 2011, 77-year-old Joseph Nasso was arrested in Reno, Nevada for murders of 4 women in California that were committed between 1977 and 1994, all whom are believed to have been prostitutes, and all of whose surname began with the same letter as that of her first name. He was a New York native who lived in Rochester during the early 1970s, and he was known to have regularly traveled between New York and California. He was described as a person of interest in the Alphabet murders, and has confirmed that DNA testing has confirmed that his DNA is not a match to samples recovered from Wanda's body. Nasso was brought into trial on June 18th and charged with the murder of 4 of the California Alphabet murders, which I did not know that there were Alphabet murders that took place in 2 different places. So, yeah. He was unanimously convicted on April the 20th, and he was sentenced to death. Now, the aftermath of all this, in 1995, Carmen's mother made her first public statement regarding the murder of her daughter, and she granted an interview to Democrat and Chronicle reporter. She stated that although she had lived her entire life in poverty, if she could have only one thing before her death, it would not be wealth, but knowing who murdered her daughter, adding, and I quote, "If I could die knowing who killed my Carmen, I would die more peacefully than I have lived. It is the only thing I want in my life, to know that this person had to pay for the terrible things he did to my little girl. If the person who did this could have any compassion, he would see the pain and suffering the families of these little girls have gone through for all this time." End quote. They published a series of articles focusing on the ongoing police investigation into the Alphabet murders in 2009, where the public was appealed for information with view to closing the case. They resulted in the Rochester Police Department receiving approximately 20 new leads. Although all leads received were pursued, there were none that resulted in the apprehension or conviction of the perpetrators, and the police department does remain committed to solving the case. So, yeah. Now, of course, on Discovery Channel, there's a 45-minute episode, and there is an interview with the FBI agent who developed an offender profile which he likely indicated there were two separate offenders. So any of those suspects could have done it, but some of them were ruled out. So, they're not, some of them were not ruled out on all of the murder. So, it still, they're all suspects. So that's all I have, guys. I know it's short again today. Now, what I also did find interesting before I leave, Carmen Cologne's murder proved that it was to be the first homicide in Monroe County that remained unsolved in over 5 years. That was one of the big things I did not know, about this. And I did know that now also it's noted here at that the Rochester Police Department did receive 6 differing descriptions of the vehicle reversing in pursuit of Carmen. The eyewitness, however, even though he described the car as a luxury model, one of the other eyewitnesses also observed the child being led back to the vehicle, suggesting that she had likely known her abductor. So there are a lot of things on this case that, kind of interesting. Okay, that's all for today, guys. Thank you for listening, and I want you guys to have a great week, and I will see you all next time.